Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Super Scout XL. Now this plane has a lot of improvements over our original Scout XL. Mainly, it has removable wings, a front-loading top hatch for batteries and accessories, and also access to your electronics, and best of all, a really cool bomb bay. In this video, we're going to show you how to go from the workbench all the way to the skies. And the first video we're going to start with is how to build our wings. So let's get our materials in order, and we'll get started. So to begin our Super Scout build, the first thing we're going to start with is our main wings. The first thing we want to do is pop out all of our parts, then we're going to identify them, and then we'll start building. As you can see, we need quite a big table here to handle quite a big airplane. But we have all of our parts popped out. Let's go and identify them, and then we're going to take half of the wing and build one half of a wing at a time. Both wing halves are going to build the exact same. First, we have our two main wing halves. Secondly, you're going to see that we have three different sets of spars. We have our two main spars and our trailing edge spar, and again the mirrored image of our two main spars and our trailing edge spar. To give this wing extra strength, we're also going to be adding some plywood to make sure this plane lasts long, and you can also do high aerobatic maneuvers, pulling a little bit more pressure than typical. For that reason, we have our main wing hold down pieces, and we also have our spar doublers. An important piece that we don't want to lose is going to be our dihedral gauge. We're going to keep that handy so when we join the wings we can get the proper amount of dihedral. Let's go ahead and we'll isolate both wing halves in half of the pieces, and then we'll put one half aside and then start building. To make this very easy, let's go ahead and glue all of our spar pieces together. You're going to notice that there's a score cut on our speed build kits. If you're building from the plans, that's going to be indicated as a red line. I always like to kind of pre-fold these pieces in half, make sure that there's no issue. If you have to, you can always take a razor blade and lightly cut down the score cut to make it fold even easier. Once we have all these pieces cut in half, we're going to put a bead of glue along each side, the shortest side for the one that's a partial spar, and glue them together. I have my hot glue gun set right at medium. A lot of times people want to turn it all the way up to hot. This hot glue gun has a tremendous amount of heat to it. You don't need that high temperature. You want to be able to work quicker with it. So turn it down to medium or just below. I got a hot glue stick in here, and the first thing we're going to want to do is place a bead right along the bottom here. A lot of times people think that more glue is more strength, and that's just simply not the case. The biggest thing we want to do is make sure it's spread nice and even. So we're going to use the table as our friend. We're going to press this down. Notice I'm being careful not to give myself a paper cut. Trailing edge is done. Let's do the same process on the main spar. You'll notice as I'm flattening this off, one side has a 90-degree end and the other side has a beveled end. The beveled end is going to point inwards towards the center of the wing. There's the one main spar. And then finally, we're going to focus our glue on the shorter piece, just so we don't put glue where we don't need it. I'll just flip this over. And there we go. You're going to notice that this extra piece here is empty. That's because we have a piece of plywood that's going to go ahead and match that perfectly. Now it's important when we're matching up our plywood that we don't want to have this backwards so the bevels aren't on the same direction. Flip this over so both bevel sides meet up perfectly. You're also going to notice there's about a millimeter of gap in between here. That's because the wings are going to crush together. We don't want the wood hitting before the foam hits. Now that we have this matched up, I'm going to go ahead and place a bead of glue right down. And again, we're going to match the plywood up so the beveled end is right along the edge, leaving that 1 millimeter gap at the very edge. All right, now that we have all three of our spars assembled, let's go ahead and take our main piece here. We're going to do a double bevel on the leading edge, and from that point, we can start gluing our spars down. Now in our crafty kit, we give you all the tools that you need to basically build all of our speed build kits and so many other airplanes as well too. One of the best pieces that we have is going to be our hobby knife. You're going to notice our hobby knife has different detents in it, and that's just to kind of make it more ergonomic as we're cutting our bevel cut. I'm going to go ahead and explain how to do a bevel cut here, and a lot of it is in the posture of your hand, and that's also done for safety. We always want to make sure that we keep our hands far away from where the knife blade is going to be passing through, and we also want to concentrate on the very center of the facing paper down in the middle here. When we cut our bevel cuts, we don't want to cut down through the center of the facing paper and leave it in two pieces. If you accidentally do this, don't worry, it can easily be repaired with a piece of tape. The easiest way to do your bevel cut is to take the leading edge or any surface that you plan on beveling and take it to the edge of the table and let it overhang about an inch. From that point, I'm going to take my hobby knife and I'm going to go ahead and hold it at about a 45-degree angle. You don't want to try to cut at a 90-degree angle because the knife is going to wander. You also want to use a sharp knife. Sharp knives are safer than dull knives. Make sure that you don't accidentally cut the leading edge on the wrong score cut. You're going to notice that the wingtip curves around and meets exactly where the leading edge is. For proper placement here, we're going to cup this in our hand. Notice that my hand is well away from the knife, and I'm going to keep this just above the center where that facing paper is. Once we have that angle, I'm going to go ahead and glide it right on through, and I'm just going to make sure I concentrate on keeping my blade just above the center. This doesn't have to look perfect because it's going to be on the inside of the wing. And if at any point that the cut is not what you like, you can always go back and do it again. Now with this kit, you have plenty of scrap foam. I'd strongly recommend practicing these bevel cuts on a piece of scrap foam before you go onto your main wing. Again, we're going to do the same process here. I'm going to start just above the facing paper, and you're going to notice that angle is perfect to glide right on through the foam. Now I don't need to go all the way to the trailing edge. I just need to go to the point where the bottom surface of the wing stops, and that's right there. A sign of a good double bevel cut is where you can easily move the foam up 90 degrees without feeling any resistance. That's the perfect amount to be able to get you to where you need, so the foam's going to roll over easily for you. Once we've done our bevel cuts, we can go ahead and move on to putting our main spars down. I'm just going to go ahead and fold the wing in half so you can easily see it here. You're going to notice here that there's a couple etch marks here that we're going to use to basically guide where we're going to put our plywood down. The first thing we want to put down is going to be our main piece that you see right here. And you're going to notice that there's a hole right here. This is for our wing hold down screws to pass through. The hole that you see on the bottom portion of your wing is actually for your center of gravity. So don't misplace those or think that this has to line up with this. You're going to line it right over the etch line with the hole pointing towards the center of the wing, not towards the wingtip. We're always going to do a quick test fit. And again, you're going to notice we have that 1 millimeter gap right on the center section. That's to give us the proper amount of crush that we need on our foam. Once we're happy with that, I'm just going to go around the perimeter of our etch mark, keeping it about 1/4 of an inch in. And I like to kind of wiggle it around here, spread that glue out. The more even and smooth that you can get that film, the stronger of a joint you're going to get. There we go. We're going to hold that down for about 30 seconds, and then we can go ahead and glue on our spar. The next spar that we're going to go ahead and glue down is going to be the spar with the piece of wood glued on it. Now the spar side that we're going to want to use is going to be the spar that has the bevel that's going to give us the best dihedral. So in other words, you're going to notice that the angle or the measurement on the top surface is going to be shorter than the measurement on the bottom surface. And you're going to want this to press up against the plywood. That's going to give us the strongest glue joint. If by any chance you have this backwards, just simply grab the other spar, glue it together, and make sure that your piece looks just like this. The most important thing we want to make sure is, again, that the bevel is angled this way and not this way. You're going to notice that these etch marks are perfectly right over the wing, and that's exactly where we want to glue it. Once we test fit it, we make sure we have plenty of hot glue in our glue gun. I'm going to go ahead and put some glue right up against where those two surfaces are going to meet, and then we go right down the full surface, right in between the two etch lines. Now I can go ahead and raise it up, kind of wiggle it back and forth, and line it up. You're going to notice that your spar reaches from one portion of the wing on the outer wingtip and is flush with the inner portion there. Once you have this glued down, give it about 30 seconds to dry, and we can do the same process on the other piece. Again, we're going to locate now the spar without the actual wood in it, and we're going to locate the beveled edge, making sure that the edge that has a longer measurement is going to be meeting the bottom surface of the wing, and the edge with the shorter measurement on the top is pointing up. We always like to do test fits to make sure that we know exactly where to put it. And once we're happy with that, we can place this down. Place a nice bead of glue right on that area, right in between the two edge marks. There we go. Just one last check, make sure we have everything right. And we're going to line it up with the edge marks. If for any reason you're concerned about strength, you can always put an extra bead of glue right along the bottom of your spars just to add a little bit more strength. Our final piece that we're going to glue is going to be our trailing edge spar here, and you're going to notice that you have the laser side and the folded side. I always like to keep the folded side on the outside. It just makes a nicer edge for us. Again, we're going to line it up right with the trailing edge of the lower portion of our wing and also the edge mark. All we need is a bead of glue right down the middle. No beveled edges to worry about. So I'm just going to go ahead and line up my two edges and then press this into place. We're going to give this about 30 seconds to dry, and then we can move on to our next step. Feel free to pause the video and make sure that your wing looks just like what you see here. Now that we have the internals of our wing prepared, let's go ahead and practice folding this over. For this, I like to point the leading edge away from me, and I like to just simply take my hands down and let the wing naturally fold on the score cuts that you see here. Once we have that, we're slowly going to use the flats of our hands, not direct pressure, and we're going to slowly rock this down until it meets up with the spar on the top here. You're going to also notice that the back portion of the wing is going to meet up against the rear trailing edge spar. We want this to fold over so that the leading edge doesn't lift up, and also that the portion that goes right over our spars is parallel with the table. Once we're happy with the way everything fits, we can open this up. And to give the wing a little bit extra strength, we're going to go ahead and place a light bead of glue right down each of these open gaps. From that point on, we can close it, and we're going to kind of hop the wing up and down so we don't actually glue it together, but this is going to add a tremendous amount of strength. So I got plenty of glue in my hot glue gun here. I'm going to place a thin bead of glue, nothing too excessive. We really don't want it to drip out too much. There we go. We're going to repeat that process one more time. I like to go down 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let it open up slightly. Down 10 seconds. Now I'm not putting excessive pressure here. I'm keeping the flats of my fingers on there. I'm not pushing down. You don't need to be heavy on it. Just hopping it. And what we should see is that the wing is going to take its form and it's going to hold it there. There we go. And that looks great. Now you can see when we open this up here, we have a little bit of stringiness, no big deal at all, but the wing is holding its shape beautifully. I'm just going to go ahead and preload this. And from this point on, I'm only going to concentrate on the leading edge and the top of the two main spars. We can always save this back trailing edge for an additional step later to glue that down. So my first step here is I'm going to place a bead of glue right down the leading edge. I'll place a bead of glue right on the very top. Notice I'm not getting antsy and rushing anything. This glue gives you a good 30 to 45 seconds to dry. Even a little bit longer, actually. I'm just taking my time, smooth hands. There we go. I always stop and start about a 1/4 inch from the edge. And now I can go ahead and take this down. My only concern is going to be right over the spar and the leading edge here. So you're going to see me kind of rubbing back and forth here. Again, I'm not pushing down. You shouldn't have to put a lot of pressure on these wings. There we go. And we're not going to rush this part. We're going to give this a full minute to fully dry before we move on to our next step. We want to make sure the glue is holding everything together and not going to accidentally open up under the pressure. A little tip to keep your models as nice as possible is anytime you're gluing something where you're using the table as your friend, before you go on to the next step, just wipe your hands over there and make sure there's no glue globs that are sitting there. That can easily dent the foam, and although it's not going to compromise how the plane flies, it will go ahead and dent the foam and compromise how the plane looks. Now that our wing is glued firmly on the main spar, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the rear spar. You're going to notice that we can very delicately open this up, and it kind of wants to hold shut, and that's exactly what we want. All we simply need to do is press the tip of our hot glue gun in, and I'm just going to feed a nice bead of glue right down the edge, all the way to about a 1/4 inch from the far edge. And now we can go ahead and lay this flat on the table just like you see here, and we can hold it for 35 seconds to a minute. And just like that, 1/2 of our wing is now done. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process now on the other side, and then we'll go ahead and work on joining them together. All right, we're going to go through the crib note version here because we've already done this once. First thing we're going to do is we're going to fold all 3 of our main spars over 180 degrees. Next, we're going to glue them together. With our spars glued together, we're going to add our wooden piece, making sure that the beveled edge lines up exactly with the beveled edge of our main spar. Now we can put our attention towards the main wing, cutting a double bevel on the leading edge. Make sure that you don't accidentally cut the leading edge on the wrong score cut. You're going to notice that the wingtip curves around and meets exactly where the leading edge is. We're going to make sure our hands are clear from our score cut and holding the blade at a 45-degree angle. We're going to keep it just above the facing paper as we cut through. On the top surface of the wing, notice that we're starting the score cut right where the two surfaces meet, not from the wingtip. We're going to confirm that we can easily bend up our wing 90 degrees, confirming that our double bevel cut is deep enough. Now we're going to go ahead and prepare the inner portion of the wing by first gluing down our main spar. Make sure when you glue down the main spar that the hole is pointing towards the center of the wing. This is going to be our wing hold down screw hole. Once we're happy with the fit, we're going to glue it in place. Again, the hole is pointing towards the center of the wing. We're going to line up right over the etch marks. And take note that we have about a millimeter gap between the center of the wing and the wood. Now we can glue on our main spar with the wood portion on it. Again, we're going to make sure that the bevel is actually pointing upwards to allow the wing to have proper dihedral. So that means that the measurement on the bottom surface of the spar is going to be bigger than the measurement on the top surface of the spar. Once we're happy with the fit, we'll place a bead of glue down, making sure that we glue the wood pieces together with the hot glue. We'll run right down the edge. And then we'll press it into place. Same process on the next spar. We're going to locate the bottom of the spar by having the longer measurement than the top measurement. We're going to do a practice fit, and then we're going to glue it in place. Finally, we're going to glue our trailing edge spar down. I always like to find the area that's been folded 180 degrees. It's a little bit smoother. We'll place a bead of glue right down between the etch marks. And then we'll press it in place, keeping it lined up with the trailing edge and the etch line on the inside of the wing. If at any time any of your spars seem weak, you can always go back with a bead of glue around the edges just to firm them up a little bit. Now that our spars are glued in place, we'll establish the form of our wing by gently allowing it to crease right over top of our score cuts. And then we're going to take it right onto the build table. We're going to slowly use flat hands as we slowly press down, making sure that the leading edge does not lift up and that the top surface of our spar is parallel to the table. Once we're happy with the way everything crushes, we can reinforce the shape of the wing by putting a thin bead of glue right down in the opening of our score cuts. Again, we're going to make sure that the leading edge is firmly against the table. We're going to hold this down, count to 10, lift up, hold it down, count to 10, lift up. And we're going to do this 3 or 4 times until the glue is fully dry. Once our wing has its established shape and it's no longer opening up on us, we can make sure that we have plenty of hot glue in our hot glue gun, and we're going to place a bead of glue right inside the leading edge of our wing. And then a healthy bead of glue on the top of each of our spars. We're going to save the trailing edge spar for last just to make life a little bit easier so we don't have to rush too much. There we go. And we're going to fold this around, and again, nice flat pressure. Notice I'm keeping the leading edge firmly against the table, and I'm making sure that the top surface of the spar is pressed firmly against the spar and it's parallel to the bottom surface of the table. We're going to give this a good minute to fully dry, and then we'll lock down our trailing edge spar. Now that our main spars are glued in place, we can kind of open this up very gently here. You're going to notice it wants to kind of clamshell shut. We have plenty of hot glue in our hot glue gun. We're simply going to slide the tip of our hot glue gun in and place a bead of glue right down in between the wing surfaces. And now we can take it right to the table. And just like we did on the top here, we're going to hold that in place for a good minute to let it fully dry. At this point, both your wing halves should be built. Make sure that your wings look just like what you see here. Locate your dihedral gauge, have some tape ready, and we'll join them together. Now, because every wing build's a little bit different here, this is a great time where if you have to make any kind of trimming or adjustment, you can easily do so. The first thing that we want to do here is that you're going to notice that there's a gap on the very top. This is so the wings can have the proper amount of dihedral and squeeze together. To make this process easier, what we're going to do is we're going to flip the wings upside down, and we're going to join the two halves together just like you see here. Notice that I'm kind of shingling them over top of each other just to get a nice tight joint. Once we're happy with the way those join together, I'm going to take a piece of tape here. I'm going to tape on one side, kind of holding it up. I'm going to press it into each other, and then I'm going to tape it down. I'm not going to fold these over quite yet here. We will do that later on. But what you should see is now we have a nice ability to hinge this up. Don't worry if these don't match up perfectly. It's going to be just fine and completely hidden. Again, every wing build's a little bit different. Once we put our tape on the bottom here, we have a nice hinge to be able to lift this up here. And you're going to notice when this lifts up, it meets the joints right about the point where our dihedral gauge is holding it down. We don't want there to be too much pressure, but we do want it to meet real nice. If we need to do any sanding or adjusting or trimming, feel free to do so you get this proper joint. Now that we know that we can get the proper dihedral, I'm going to go ahead and open this up 180 degrees. Once we've opened this up 180 degrees, I'm going to apply a healthy bead of glue all along the surfaces of the wing that are going to join with the other surface. Make sure you have an extra glue stick handy so you don't run out of glue in this step. I'm going to get a healthy bead of glue right along all the edges, also along the wood. There we go. We're going to unfold this just like before. And I'm going to take that dihedral gauge and lay it in a position. You'll notice I kind of put these little scraps aside. This really helps out with smearing all the glue in there. Now this does have plywood spars, and if you want to add a little extra strength, you can always join these 2 points right here with a piece of plywood. We've done a lot of stress testing, we haven't had to do so, but if you're planning on doing some pretty extreme aerobatics, it wouldn't hurt to glue a piece of plywood in this section. Now while this is drying here, we're going to do some additional reinforcement. I'm going to apply a bead of glue right on this top seam on both sides. Once I have that, I'm going to use our scrap piece just like a squeegee, and I'm going to paint that in and press it into that gap. Believe it or not, this is going to add a tremendous amount of strength to your model. I'm just going to paint around all the edges here. There we go. And now I can take that excess and fold it up. We're going to give this another minute to fully dry, and once we do, I'm going to come back with some additional packing tape and I'm going to wrap it completely around, and that's going to give us a tremendous amount of strength. The way that you'll know that your glue is fully dry is after you've given it about 3 minutes to dry and you pull it, it's not going to drop at you. Let's go ahead and take some tape. We'll wrap it around a couple times, get a good strong base, and then we're going to cut out the openings and we can move on to our next step. I'm going to lay it right over the top here. And then I'm going to seam it down on the bottom. This tape adds a tremendous amount of strength, so definitely don't neglect this step. I like to simply cut it right down the middle here on the top surface and fold these two edges in. And there we go. Our wing is now complete. We're ready to move on to our next step, which is installing the servos and the ailerons. So our next step, now that we have our main wing structure complete, is going to be to install the servos. This may be the very first time that you've ever done servo installation or servo centering or the whole process of putting push rods in. Don't worry, we have some really great tech videos to show you how to do it, but I am going to take you through it and show you how to do it in this video as well too. The items that we're going to need for installing our servos is going to be our servos themselves, push rod wire, some servo extensions to get the leads to where we need to ultimately hook them up to the receiver at. We're also going to use our ESC and a servo centering tool to be able to pre-center our servos. Other tools we're going to need is a simple pair of pliers, and if you really want to get fancy and make Z-bends easy, we have a really great Z-bend tool that's available in our store. We're also going to show you a really cool tool called our Servo Buddy. Servo Buddy simply centers servos with the press of one button. There's no need to hook up batteries and servo centering tools at all. Let's go ahead and first prepare our servos for installation. We're going to go ahead and pop them out. You're going to notice that these are 20-gram servos. They have a lot of strength and they're incredibly durable. In with our servos, we have these servo arms. The servo arms are going to be what actually puts the movement to our push rods that ultimately moves our ailerons or control surfaces. I'm going to locate the servo arm with 4 equal sides that you see here. To prepare our servo arms, we only need one side, so for that reason, I'm going to take my cutting tool and I'm going to cut off 3 of the 4 sides. I can now install my servo arm 90 degrees on top of my servo. Now these servos do come pre-centered here, but it is always a good idea to make sure your servo centering tool is handy, so before you make your push rods, you can make sure you have it to the proper length, or that you don't accidentally turn it. Oftentimes you're putting it on and you accidentally do this, now you got to recenter it. The servo buddy works real simple here, and this is going to be available around the middle of May. It's pretty cool. You simply plug it in, doesn't matter which way, you hit the button one time, and you're going to notice that once you hit that button, it's going to recognize it's a servo, and you can cycle it back and forth. This is definitely the preferred way of being able to center your servos quickly and easily. Now that we have our servo centered, I'm just going to go ahead and lock down our servo arm with our servo screw. For this servo, it's going to be a black machine screw. You want to make sure that you don't put the wrong screw in and strip out your gears or damage your servo. There we go. Again, you can see as I tighten this up, I moved it. Not a big deal because I can simply just plug it right back in. And with a push a button, it's centered again. Going to do the same process now on the other servo. This time, I'll go ahead and hook it up to our servo centering tool that's currently included in our crafty kit. And we're going to use the ESC to be able to power up the servo centering tool. Now for the traditional servo centering tool, we're going to just simply need the power from our electronic speed control or our ESC. We'll need a battery and of course our servo centering tool. You're going to notice that there is an in and an out. This servo centering tool can actually center up to 3 servos at the same time, which is a really cool feature, and it can also do some other cool features like swiping or fine-tune adjustment. So it's a pretty powerful little unit, and it's a really handy tool to have. We're going to line up on the inside, we're going to line up our brown to negative, our positive is going to be in the middle, and our signal is going to be either an orange or a white wire. We can now plug our servo, again lining up the brown to our minus, our plus in the middle, and our signal is going to be the yellow or the white wire lining up with S. Notice that these are parallel and they're not going vertically. Finally, all we need to do is simply plug this in. I'll go ahead and put a servo on here so you can see it. And you're going to see when I press my servo on, I'm just going to make this mirror the other one here. There we go. And with our servo arm installed here, you're going to see when I push this, we have it centered, we have it sweeping, and the manual mode is where we can manually move the dial back and forth and get a real fine-tune adjustment. Now this servo centering tool is incredibly precise, which is exactly what we need. All we need to do is line up where it says center right in the middle, and we're good to go. So whether you have the servo buddy in the near future or the servo centering tool that's included in our crafty kit, you can easily center your servos at any time you need. And just like the other one, I'm going to lock this down. Once we have both of our servo arms installed, notice that they're pointing away from each other, and we are ready to move on to our next step. Now this is a process that we're going to do anytime that we're installing our servos, whether it's through the servo buddy or with our servo centering tool. So always keep those components nearby just in case you need them. I'm just going to lay down a couple pillows from our couch here just to keep from pushing and denting the top of the wing here. It makes it easier to work on too. You're going to notice that when we go to install our servos here, that they're not going to quite reach. For that reason, we need to put in a servo extension on it. Servo extensions come with our power pack kits, and we're going to locate the one that's 30 centimeters long. We're going to always make sure whenever we're plugging into servo extensions that we're lining up the grounds, the signals, and the positives together. When we do this, we're going to plug this in, but we don't want this to come disconnected inside the wing. So for that reason, we're going to take a piece of tape, and once we've confirmed that everything is lined up, signal, power, and ground, we can tape it together. One of the biggest issues that have to be troubleshooted out is when servo extensions are plugged in backwards. So take extra time to confirm that your wires are plugged in together. And a really cool tip if you want to test it is bring out your servo buddy or your servo centering tool and cycle it with the extension. To keep the push rods as short as possible, we're going to make sure that the arm is pointing out towards the wingtip and it's also as close to the hinge line as possible. All we simply need to do is feed our wire down through, and it should easily pass all the way to the center section. We'll just keep pushing it down. Sometimes I'll use gravity as my friend. There we go. We're going to pull that through just like you see here. And then with a rocking motion, these should press right down into place. We're going to hold off gluing them for just a moment here until we have all of our pieces hooked up and centered. Let's do the same process now on the other side. Again, we're going to add our 30 centimeter extension. We're going to take our time lining up the brown, the red, and the yellow, or orange. Could be either or. And we're going to tape them together. Never neglect the step of taping these together. It's so easy for time or a crash to be able to have these come unplugged. And at that point, you got to go ahead and do some cutting and assembly to be able to get access to it. There we go. Same process as before. We're going to get it right on down through. Again, with the arm pointing towards the wingtip and as close as possible to the hinge line, we're going to press this down into place. Let's go ahead and put our attention now towards the main ailerons. The main ailerons are going to have to be cut loose, and to do this, we're going to do a complete cut through this side right here, and from that point, we're going to cut along the etch line and be able to crack them loose. You'll notice that these are actually etched in instead of cut in, and the reason for that is this can actually be built as a 3-channel model. A lot of people really love 3-channel Flite, which doesn't include ailerons, but actually includes the rudder. But for this application, we are going to go ahead and show you how to do the ailerons. I strongly recommend putting it in, especially if you're going to be putting our FT or a stabilization board in it. So the first thing we want to do, we're going to cut right through this etch line here, all the way through. Make sure you have a nice sharp blade for this. And what I also like to do is take our push rod and at a 90-degree angle, run it through. That gives us a perfect opening that keeps the ailerons from rubbing against each other. Once we've done our complete cut through, we should be able to carefully fold this over 180 degrees. Now, just like we did our double bevel here, we're going to do a single bevel on the aileron side, and this is going to give us the ability to let our aileron move up and down. I'll go ahead and do this in front of the camera. You can take this to the edge of the table. The hardest part about this is just getting it started at the beginning. Whoop, and I noticed that it's kind of balling up, so I'm going to go ahead and put a brand new razor blade. Anytime you see the foam starting to ball up with your razor, change out your blade. That means your blade is getting dull. And just like before here, we're going to keep it just above the facing paper. There we go. That moves nice and easy. Now to make this hinge line nice and strong, our next step here is we're going to reinforce it with a little bit of hot glue, but we're not going to put a bead down and leave it. We're actually going to put a really small bead right down over the facing paper and the foam, and then we're going to squeegee it off. This is going to push the hot glue down into the foam and also the facing paper and make a nice durable hinge. To do this, I like to locate a little squeegee from our scrap foam. You can always cut one out of the scrap foam that you have. Clean off the tip there. And I'm going to press the tip of the hot glue gun right over the hinge line. See, it's a very, very thin bead of glue, and now I'm going to squeegee it all off. Make sure that you don't leave any extra glue globs on your hinge line. Notice I'm just taking all of it off. There we go. There we go. And we just need to kind of open this up just a little bit more. Trim off that little. There we go. Let's go ahead and do the same process on the other side. First, we're going to go ahead and cut this through. We're going to fold it over close to 180 degrees. Then we're going to come back with our knife with a nice sharp blade, and we're going to cut our single bevel on the aileron side. I'm just going to kind of roll this up right at the very edge there. Always make sure we can easily bend this both ways. If it resists you on the downward side, that means you just need to take off a little bit more foam and get a little closer to the facing paper. Once we're happy with that, we can reinforce the hot glue hinge by applying a thin bead of glue right over the facing paper in the center and the foam. Make sure to fully squeegee this off so you don't accidentally leave any glue globs that are going to bind up your aileron. Make sure this is fully dry before testing your hinge, and we're good to go. Now that we have our hinges cut, everything's reinforced, we're ready to go ahead and move on to our control horns and our pushrod installation. This is where we're going to be bending our first Z-bend on a piece of wire. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this with a simple pair of pliers, but then I'm also going to show you how to do it with our Z-bend pliers. If you're going to be building a lot, definitely invest in a pair of Z-bend pliers. They're incredibly easy. To make a simple Z-bend with a pair of pliers, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grip our wire about 1/4 inch from the edge. From that, we're going to bend it down 90 degrees. Just a little bit less. There we go. Make sure that your bends are nice and sharp. Our next bend here is we're going to go ahead and rotate 90 degrees, and we're going to go down about 3 or 4 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch. Don't go down too deep, or else it's going to cause the Z-bends to be able to wander. From that point on, we're going to bend 90 degrees once again. You're going to notice that this is what we call a modified Z-bend. In other words, it's not a true Z. It basically kind of goes around and bends 90 degrees. The way that we fix that is we're going to grab it one more time and very slowly rotate that 90 degrees. At this point, we have a perfect Z-bend. I'm going to go ahead and cut this loose real quick, and we'll show you how the Z-bend pliers work. All we simply need to do for our Z-bend is line up the edge of the wire with the edge of the pliers, and with one quick pinch, we have the perfect Z-bend. If you're building with kids in a classroom or as a chapter group, I strongly recommend buying a pair of these. They will last you forever. Now for this application, because I'm not only going to be training people, but I'm also going to be doing aerobatics with this airplane, I'm going to go to the furthest hole out on our servo arm. This is going to give us the most deflection. Now with our FT-OR5 that we will be installing, it automatically has the rates being able to be dialed down when you're in different modes, like level assist mode. Now if you are a beginner and you're not using the Aura, make sure that you don't go any further than the 3rd hole out from the servo screw. That way it'll give you enough throw to be able to maneuver fine, but it won't be so sensitive that's going to be difficult to fly. You can use a little drill bit if you want to be able to pre-drill this, but a little wiggle back and forth is typically all you need. Notice that I'm moving my servo around, so I will need to center it later. There we go. And just like that, we have our servo arm in there. Next, we're going to go ahead and locate our control horn, and we're going to install that. Just pop that out. I will be using optional linkage stoppers for this set. If you guys are looking to be able to have a really good experience and be able to field adjust, linkage stoppers take all the stress of having to measure and do a perfect Z-bend on the backside. I strongly recommend getting them. Now when I test fit this, I'm going to make sure that the holes of our control horn are directly over our hinge line. If it's too far forward or backwards, you're not going to get even deflection up and down. Now since I moved that servo arm, I always want to make sure that I center everything up before I make any kind of fine adjustments. Now if you're going to go ahead and bend a perfect Z-bend here, what I'd recommend is once you have your control horn put in the place that you want it, I simply take my pushrod down right next to it and I make a mark. And that mark is going to be the point that you want to be able to bend this and have it go 90 degrees through the hole. And if you're using a linkage stopper, you're going to notice that this simply just goes right through the hole here, and we're going to lock this down, which means you can adjust that later. For this application, I'm going to use the optional XL linkage stoppers here. So I'm not going to have to worry about cutting it here, but what I will need to do, I'm going to go ahead and cut this about 1/4 inch beyond. I'm not going to worry about my Z-bend. And since I'll be using my linkage stopper, I'm just going to go ahead and fasten this on. I'm going to screw my little grub screw in. One thing to take note of here is we have 2 different size linkage stoppers, one for thin pushrod wire and one for thicker. Make sure that when you select your linkage stoppers that you select the one for the XL or the thicker landing gear wire. Now I can pass this right on through. Again, we're going to press this right down in place. Our servo is centered up, so all I need to do is place a bead of glue right down over where our control horn is. Again, I'm confirming that our hole is directly over our hinge line, and we're going to let that dry. And now that our control horn's in place, we're going to fasten down our servo. Now the reason I do this one at a time here is if you bend a push rod and maybe it's just a millimeter or two off, you can actually slide your servo forward or backward when you're gluing this down and get the perfect adjustment. Just make sure that your servo is centered and active during that time so you get that perfect fit. All I simply need to do is lift it up, just like that. I'll drop down in each one of these flanges. Again, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that's centered, and we're going to press it down into place. And if you had a push rod without the linkage stopper, this would be the point where basically you could slide that forward or backwards about a millimeter. Because I don't need to do that, all I need to do is make sure it's nice and flush. Use my screwdriver, and then carefully tighten it down. Notice I'm supporting the control horn so that we don't overstress that control horn and break it. And once this is fully dry, we're in good shape. Now I went in great detail to show you exactly how to be able to bend these and install these because we're going to do this 3 more times on the other aileron, on the rudder, and on the elevator. Feel free to refer back to this portion of the video anytime you need a refresher, or check out our tech channel because we have lots of tips and tricks on that channel. We've done this once, let's go ahead and do this again on the other aileron. So just like on the other wing, our first step is after we make our Z-bend, whether through our Z-bend pliers or with our normal pliers, we're going to install it, in this case, to the outermost servo arm. If you're a beginner not using our stabilization board, do the third one. Next, we're going to go ahead and pre-install our control horn, just making sure that the holes line up directly over our hinge line. We're going to mark right where the push rod meets the hole on the top portion of our control horn. Because I'm doing the linkage stopper, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut this about a 1/4 inch from that mark. Now would be a really good time to basically install your linkage stopper. Again, we're using the XL style linkage stoppers, the ones made for the thicker wire, not the thin wire. Once we made our mark, it's a great time to basically install our linkage stopper here. Make sure that you have the backing plate on firm and that it doesn't wiggle. Now we can go ahead and slide it into our push rod. Now we can slide our linkage stopper into our push rod and press it into place. We're always going to keep our servo centering tool handy just to make sure that we get the most precision possible. And once we're happy with everything, we can glue our control horn down. Notice that we always do one step at a time. That way we can make sure that we get precision, whether it's our control horn, our push rod placement, or our servo placement. Once our control horn is glued down and solid, we can lift our servo up just so slightly, and we'll place a drop of glue underneath each one of the wings. If you're bending Z-bends on both ends, this is a really good time to get some fine adjustment by moving your servo forward or backwards a millimeter just to get it perfect. And notice that I'm always keeping our servo centering tool on during these steps. Once we're happy with everything, I'm going to go ahead and line this up with my servo centered. And for our linkage stopper, we're simply going to just tighten it down. You can see once you do this process, it only takes a matter of a couple minutes per servo to get the perfect setup every time. Well friends, our wing is now done. We have our ailerons cut in, our linkage is done. We are ready to move on to our next step, which is going to be the fuselage. Let's go ahead and find a safe spot for our wing, but keep it handy because we are going to need it in certain steps of the fuselage when we join the wing to the main body.